Look, I don't know who let the Coast Guard Auxiliary bring their antique cannon to a SEAL qualification range, but someone needs to escort this lady back to the yacht club before she hurts herself. The crowd of operators, all cordite and sculpted muscle, let out a ripple of condescending laughter. It was a sound born of arrogance, a chorus of dismissal aimed at the single, still figure standing at firing point 7. The woman, whose nameplate simply read Reed, said nothing. Her focus remained a universe contained within the worn latches of a massive Pelican case. Her movements were economical, devoid of wasted energy, a quiet testament to a discipline the noisy men around her could not comprehend. She did not look up. She did not acknowledge the insult. She simply continued her task, her hands moving with a practiced grace that was its own form of silent rebuttal. But from the observation tower 300 feet above the shimmering heat of the Coronado Range, Admiral Thorne leaned forward, his powerful binoculars fixed not on the imposing rifle now emerging from the case, but on the almost imperceptible way she indexed her fingers against the stock, a subtle, forgotten technique from a school that no longer officially existed. He saw the ghost of a legend in that simple gesture, a whisper of a history written in blood and secrecy. The Admiral lowered his binoculars, a grim, knowing line forming on his lips. The young captain on the ground was about to learn a lesson that wasn't taught in any manual. If you believe true strength is measured in silence, not volume, type competence in the comments below. The air was thick with salt, testosterone, and the bitter tang of gunpowder. Captain Decker, his jaw set in a mask of smug authority, paced the firing line like a caged predator. He was the gatekeeper of this sacred ground, a place where legends were forged and weakness was mercilessly culled. Today was the final qualification for the Advanced Long-Range Interdiction course, a test of skill so demanding that even among the elite, failure was common. The target was a steel silhouette at 2,800 meters, an almost invisible speck shimmering in the desert mirage, complicated by a treacherous crosswind that whipped unpredictably through the canyons. For 2 hours, his best men, operators at the absolute peak of their physical and martial prowess, had tried and failed. Their state-of-the-art M210 enhanced sniper rifles, marvels of modern engineering, had sent round after round into the unforgiving dirt, the misses echoing their frustration. It was into this theater of failure that Master Sergeant Evelyn Reed had walked. She was not what they expected. She was perhaps 50, with lines of experience etched around eyes that held a placid, unnerving calm. Her uniform was a sterile, generic multicam, devoid of the unit patches and qualification tabs that served as a currency of respect in this world. She was an anomaly, an unwelcome variable in Decker's tightly controlled equation of excellence, and he had reacted with the only tool he truly possessed, loud, public assumption. Her silence in the face of his mockery was, to him, an admission of weakness. To Admiral Thorne, watching from above, it was the sound of a storm gathering its strength, a profound and dangerous calm before the lightning strike. The professional does not argue. The professional demonstrates. That was the code. It was a creed etched into the soul of those who operated in the lonely, silent spaces between breaths, where a single, precise action determined the course of history. Master Sergeant Reed continued her assembly, each component of the massive rifle clicking into place with the satisfying finality of a lock on a vault door. It was an older Barret M82A1, but it was immaculately maintained. The barrel had a strange, matte finish that seemed to drink the light, and the stock was worn smooth in the exact places where a human body would brace against it for 1,000 lifetimes. It was not a weapon. It was a part of her, an extension of her will. Captain Decker swaggered over, crossing his arms. You even know how to zero that museum piece? The windage here is a nightmare. My guys, the best snipers in the world, can't make the shot. What makes you think you can? He was baiting her, trying to force a reaction, to crack the infuriating shell of her composure. Reed paused her work. She slowly turned her head, and for the first time, her eyes met his. They were clear, gray, and utterly unreadable, like a winter sky over a frozen lake. She offered no defense, no explanation, no boast. She simply said, in a voice that was low and even, I have my dope. Data on previous engagements. A simple, technical term that, in this context, landed with the weight of an anvil. It was an island of pure, unassailable competence in Decker's ocean of arrogant noise. The brevity of her response, the sheer professional finality of it, left him momentarily speechless. He could only scoff and turn away, gesturing dismissively to his men as if to say, "Let's watch the show." Reed turned back to her rifle, her preparation a silent, rhythmic ritual that drew the eyes of every man on the line. The tension shifted from mockery to a kind of nervous, unwilling curiosity. They watched her chamber a single, massive 50 BMG round. It was a custom-loaded cartridge, its brass polished to a dull gleam. She settled into her prone position, the rifle becoming a seamless part of her posture. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. She was a study in absolute efficiency, a master of an art they were only just beginning to realize they did not understand. Her breathing slowed, becoming so shallow it was almost imperceptible. She was not just looking through the scope. She was communing with the space between herself and the target, reading the invisible rivers of air, feeling the subtle rotation of the earth beneath her. The silence on the range became heavy, absolute. The wind howled, a lonely sound that seemed to mock the futility of their efforts. For a full minute, she did not move. She was a statue carved from focus and patience. The operators exchanged uneasy glances. Decker tapped his foot impatiently, his arrogance beginning to curdle into doubt. Then it happened. There was no fanfare, no dramatic intake of breath. There was only a single, smooth, impossibly controlled press of the trigger. The world erupted in a deafening roar as the Barret unleashed its thunder. The concussion wave washed over the firing line, a physical blow that rattled their bones and shook the very air they breathed. The massive rifle recoiled against her shoulder, but she absorbed it with a technique so refined it seemed as if she and the weapon were one organism, designed for this exact purpose. For a long, suspended moment, everyone stared downrange, their expressions a mixture of hope and skepticism. Then, a sound, delayed by the immense distance, traveled back to them. It was not the flat thud of a round hitting dirt. It was a high, pure, resonant ping. The sound of a promise fulfilled. The sound of impossibility made real. A spotter, his scope maxed out, screamed a single word, his voice cracking with disbelief. Hit. But it was more than a hit. Through his own powerful binoculars, Admiral Thorne saw it clearly. The round hadn't just struck the 24-inch steel plate. It had impacted dead center, precisely on the small, 3-inch orange bullseye, painted there as a cynical aiming point, a detail no one was ever expected to actually hit. It was a shot that defied physics, a miracle of ballistics and human will. On the firing line, a wave of stunned silence rolled back in, deeper and more profound than before. It was the silence of shattered assumptions, the silence of awe. Captain Decker stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. The color had drained from his face, replaced by a pallor of pure, unadulterated shock. He lowered his binoculars, his hands trembling slightly. No. No way, he whispered to himself, the words swallowed by the vast, open space. That's not possible. He looked from the impossibly distant, ringing target back to the woman who was now calmly, methodically beginning to disassemble her rifle, her task complete. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a gaping void of confusion and a dawning, terrifying respect. The laughter was gone. The mockery had evaporated. All that remained was the quiet competence of the professional and the deafening echo of her single, perfect shot. From the observation tower, a single, authoritative figure began to descend. Admiral Thorne moved with the unhurried purpose of a man who owned every inch of the ground he walked on. His face, a roadmap of decades spent in the crucible of command, was set like granite. He ignored the stunned operators, his eyes fixed on two people, the humbled captain and the quiet master sergeant. He strode onto the firing line, his boots crunching on the gravel, each step a hammer blow against the fragile ego of the young SEAL officer. Decker snapped to attention, his shock momentarily replaced by the ingrained reflex of military discipline. "Admiral, sir," he stammered, his voice suddenly hoarse. Thorne didn't acknowledge him at first. He walked past Decker and stopped beside Reed, who had just finished securing her rifle in its case. She looked up at him, her expression unchanged, and gave a slight, respectful nod. The admiral returned it, a gesture of profound, shared understanding that passed between two apex professionals. Then, and only then, did he turn to face the now pale Captain Decker. Captain, Thorne's voice was low, but it cut through the air with the chilling precision of a surgeon's scalpel. You have a question about this shooter's qualifications. I believe it's time you received an answer. He pulled a ruggedized tablet from his aide's hands, his thumb swiping across the screen with practiced ease. The screen glowed to life, displaying a heavily redacted personnel file. The silence was now thick with anticipation. The assembled SEALs leaned in, their world about to be fundamentally reordered. The name at the top of the file was Reed, Evelyn M. But it was the lines of text below that held the true power, the data that would dismantle a decade of Decker's hard-won pride. The Admiral began to read, his voice clear and unwavering, each word a revelation. Unit designation, classified. Attached to Joint Special Operations Command, Advanced Marksmanship Development Group. A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't some auxiliary support role. This was the tip of the spear. Primary instructor certification, high-angle interdiction, extreme environment ballistics, counterwind theory. These were courses most of them had never even heard of, programs that existed in the shadowy realm of Tier 1 operations. Combat hours. Over 3,000, the number was staggering, double that of the most seasoned operator on the line. Awards. Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star with 2 oak leaf clusters, Bronze Star with V for Valor. He continued the list, a litany of heroism that painted a picture of a warrior who had walked through fires they could only imagine. Each medal was a story, each citation a testament to a life lived at the ragged edge of duty and sacrifice. The operators, men who defined themselves by their own accolades, stood in humbled silence. They were in the presence of a living legend, and they had been laughing at her. Thorne paused, letting the weight of the information settle. He looked directly at Decker, whose face was now a mask of utter mortification. Then, the Admiral delivered the final, devastating piece of information, the one that would forever be etched into the institutional memory of this command. He scrolled to a specific line item, a mission report addendum dated 6 years prior from a desolate mountain range in Afghanistan. And, Captain, he said, his voice dropping to an almost reverent whisper, I'd like to draw your attention to a specific confirmed engagement, officially recognized as the longest in the history of the United States military. He turned the tablet so Decker could see. There, in stark, undeniable text, was the entry, target neutralized. Range, 4,957 meters. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. 4,957 meters. Over 3 miles. It was a number so far beyond the realm of comprehension, so far past the known limits of ballistics and human capability, that it sounded like a typo, a piece of fiction. It was a shot that wasn't just difficult, it was mythological. It explained everything. The antiquated but masterfully tuned rifle, the unnerving calm, the impossible precision. They hadn't been watching a demonstration. They had been granted an audience with the master of an art form they had presumed to own. Admiral Thorne turned away from the shell-shocked captain and faced Master Sergeant Reed. In a gesture that stunned every man present, the 3-star admiral, a titan of naval special warfare, snapped to the most rigid and formal position of attention. He raised his hand in a slow, perfect salute. Master Sergeant Reed, he said, his voice ringing with a respect that bordered on awe. It is an honor to have you on my range. Thank you for the demonstration. Reed simply nodded, her expression softening for the first time with a flicker of acknowledgement. My pleasure, Admiral, she said softly. The gesture was a thunderclap. An admiral saluting a master sergeant was a profound reversal of protocol, a public declaration that in the world of true competence, rank was secondary to skill. It was the ultimate validation, and the ultimate rebuke to the shallow prejudice that had filled the air only moments before. Thorne held the salute for a long moment before dropping it, and turning back to the assembled men, his gaze sweeping over them like a fire. Let this be a lesson, he began, his voice now a low growl of command. Assumptions are a cancer. They will get you killed. They will get your brothers killed. You do not judge a warrior by their uniform, their gender, or the weapon they carry. You judge them by one thing and one thing only. Their results. He jabbed a finger toward the distant, shimmering target, a tiny monument to Reed's impossible skill. That is a result. That is competence. That is the standard. You spent all morning trying to hit a barn door with the world's most advanced technology. She hit a dime with a rifle older than most of you, because she is a professional. She has forgotten more about long-range shooting than any of you will ever know. Learn from this. Let the sting of your ignorance today be a permanent reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. His words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. The silence that followed was different. It was a silence of reflection, of deep and painful introspection. The story of that day spread through Coronado and beyond like a shockwave. It wasn't just gossip. It was a modern military fable, a cautionary tale passed down in barracks, chow halls, and whispered conversations in forward operating bases across the globe. The legend of the 5K shot and the quiet master sergeant who humbled an entire SEAL team became required listening for new recruits. It was a story about more than just marksmanship. It was a parable about the fatal flaw of arrogance and the supreme power of quiet, demonstrated competence. Captain Decker was a changed man. The public humbling he endured on the range that day broke something in him, but it forged something stronger in its place. The brittle shell of his pride was shattered, replaced by a genuine and profound humility. The following week, he was seen not on the firing line, but in the base library, his head buried in declassified manuals on ballistic theory. He sent a formal request up his chain of command, not for new equipment, but for a slot in a high-angle interdiction course, citing a critical gap in operational knowledge. He sent a personal, handwritten letter of apology to Master Sergeant Reed via the Admiral's office. He never received a reply, and he didn't expect one. The lesson itself was the only communication necessary. As for Reed, she was gone as quietly as she had arrived. She packed her rifle, loaded her gear into an unassuming government vehicle, and drove off the base without a word to anyone. She sought no recognition, accepted no praise. Her work was done. The demonstration had been a success. The point had been made, but a symbol of her visit remained. The operators on the range began referring to firing point 7, the spot where she had taken the shot, as Reed's perch. It was an unofficial designation, but it stuck with the permanence of legend. A small, brass plaque was discreetly mounted on the concrete firing block by persons unknown. It bore no name, only a date and a single, stark inscription, 4/9/57M. It became a touchstone, a place where young snipers would go to stand in silence before a big qualification, drawing inspiration not just from the impossible distance, but from the quiet professional who had conquered it. The plaque was a silent reminder that true legacy wasn't about the noise you made, but about the standards you set and the assumptions you shattered. It was a testament to the fact that respect is not a right of rank or reputation. It is a debt, paid only to proven, undeniable skill. The ripples of that day continued to spread, changing the very culture of the institution. Training protocols were subtly altered. Instructors began placing more emphasis on the intellectual and psychological aspects of marksmanship, on the quiet arts of patience, data collection, and emotional control. They used the story of Reed's shot as a teaching tool, a perfect example of how the software of the operator was infinitely more important than the hardware of their equipment. The arrogance that had been a hallmark of the teams began to temper, replaced by a more watchful, more analytical approach. They learned to look past the surface, to recognize that the most formidable threats and the most valuable allies often came in the most unassuming packages. They learned that silence could be a weapon, and that the loudest voice in the room was usually compensating for the deepest insecurity. Captain Decker, once the embodiment of that loud insecurity, became one of the most effective team leaders in the command. His newfound humility made him a better listener, a more thoughtful strategist, and a more compassionate leader of men. He never forgot the sting of his public humiliation, but he no longer saw it as a source of shame. He saw it as a gift, a painful but necessary course correction that had saved his career and perhaps one day would save his life. He often took new members of his team to firing point 7, standing before the small brass plaque. He would tell them the story not as a tale of his own failure, but as a lesson in the nature of true strength. He would point to the distant hills and speak of the invisible forces, the wind, gravity, the rotation of the earth, that a true master had to understand and command. Years passed. Master Sergeant Evelyn Reed officially retired, her name fading from active rosters and slipping into the classified archives of military history. She never gave an interview, never wrote a book. She simply disappeared back into the quiet, civilian life from which she had emerged, her legendary career known only to a select few. But her legacy was not in the record books or the files stamped top secret. Her legacy was in the quiet confidence of a new generation of operators, in the humbled wisdom of a once arrogant captain, and in a small brass plaque on a windy firing range in Coronado. It was a legacy of competence, a testament to the enduring truth that what you are is infinitely more powerful than what you say you are. The story became a foundational myth, a reminder that the heart of a warrior is not measured by the size of their muscles or the volume of their voice, but by the stillness of their hands and the precision of their actions. It taught that true professionalism is a silent language spoken through deeds, not words. The greatest respect is earned in the quiet spaces, in the moments of impossible pressure, where all that matters is the calm, focused execution of one's duty. That single, perfect shot did more than hit a target. It recalibrated the moral compass of an entire community, proving that integrity and humility were not signs of weakness, but the essential bedrock of genuine strength. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption and where practiced precision defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.